Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099 and I am here to review a book from DC Comics' New 52. This is OMAC Volume 1 titled Omactivate. This is actually the only volume of OMAC. It is written by Keith Giffen and Dan Didio and drawn by Keith Giffen as well. I am going to tackle this review a little differently than I have some of the previous reviews. I want to go through this a little quicker, see if I can do that. I'm going to talk about the things that I liked and the things that I didn't like, and just kind of go through those points a little bit quicker than I usually do. So, starting off this review with the things that I liked. I really love the artwork here. Keith Giffen's art has always been fantastic, but here especially, it feels like that he is really trying to channel Jack Kirby. And a lot of people, when they see homages to Jack Kirby, they usually ignore it or they don't really want to read it because, according to them, why bother reading an homage to Jack Kirby when you can just go read original Kirby? And I'm actually of mixed minds on this. On the one hand, I've seen plenty of stories that try to channel Jack Kirby, and that's all they attempt to do when the story itself is kind of lackluster, and then I come away from it feeling like I really had no business reading that story. On the other hand, when there is more of an attempt to tell an actual story and channel old school Jack Kirby, I am all for that, and this book, I think, tries to do that. Something else I love. This is a really great adventure story. It's fun, it's really exciting. I feel like comic books these days, they try a little too hard to be realistic, and they take away a lot of the fun when they try and do that. This comic book really manages to capture a lot of that fun that you found in comic books back in the 60s and 70s. This book, in a lot of ways, feels like the true spiritual successor to the original OMAC series by Jack Kirby, in that it is fun to read, and it is not depressing or angsty or sad or anything like that. I really enjoyed reading this, and far too often I can't say that about comic books because far too often comic books really aren't fun enough, and this definitely is very fun when you read it. Something else that I liked. This isn't so much a factor when you're reading this story in trade, but I really love that each issue of this book more or less stands on its own. You don't have any of this multi-part garbage where it's part 1 in a 6-part story, and at the end of part 6 you realize it didn't even have to be 6 parts and they were just stretching it out so that they could kill some time. This book has a complete done-in-one adventure for every issue, and I really enjoy that about that. On the other hand, a problem that I have here, we might have Superman show up in an issue, and because the issue needs to tie everything up at the end of the issue, you don't necessarily understand how or why Superman got involved with fighting OMAC. Sometimes I feel like this book would have benefited from carrying over a few subplots like where did Superman come from? Why is he working with Maxwell Lord? You could have taken a few of these things and stretch them out to last a couple of more issues and still maintain the standalone adventure story that each issue has with this book. Now on to the things that I did not like. Number 1 is the characters, or really the lack of character. There's one character in this book who I feel like is really explored, and that is the main character, Kevin Coe. And even him, you don't find out anything about him until near the very end of the book. It is not until the very last issue of this book that you find out anything about his past, and you kind of begin to understand why he acts the way that he does in this book. All of the other characters, his co-worker slash friend and his girlfriend, we know nothing about them. They are barely stereotypes, and I feel like part of the problem is this is only 8 issues. But I feel like there are plenty of other comic books out there where if you take 8 specific issues, you would be able to tell something about all of the characters. And I feel like this book doesn't really do a good job at all of really exploring any of the characters. Most of them are just there just to be there and fulfill needs of the plot. And that is really the worst kind of character in any story in any medium. Something else that I didn't like is going to seem a little petty, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about it anyway. This book is part of a reboot, so it stands to reason that there are going to be things in this book that are going to be different than they were before the reboot. For example, in this book, Maxwell Lord is in charge of the Cadmus Project, which is apparently affiliated with the Checkmate organization and is also affiliated with the Shade organization. Now, before the reboot, Checkmate, Shade, and Cadmus, they were all different organizations that really didn't have anything to do with each other. Now, I don't actually mind that all of these organizations are working together in this book. That's really neither here nor there. It's just something that happens in this book, and I saw it and I'm like, oh, okay, that's happening. I did not understand why this book decided to make Maxwell Lord in charge of Cadmus. This is one of those things, as a somewhat long-time comic book reader, I know Maxwell Lord as a guy who worked with the Justice League in the 1980s and kind of worked with their public image to make them a little bit more acceptable as heroes to the rest of the world. So it's a little strange to me that with the reboot, they seemingly arbitrarily decided that Maxwell Lord is now working with Cadmus. Now I understand that around 2006 or so, Maxwell Lord was turned into a villain, but he was never working with the Cadmus Project. So it's a little strange to me that out of nowhere he's working with those guys. Also working with the Cadmus Project is the New Gods character Mockery. This is a character who has always worked with the Evil Factory, which is basically the evil version of the Cadmus Project. And likewise, I know that this is a reboot, so there's no reason to keep that element of his character from the original comic books, but I also don't understand why they thought they needed to add Mockery to the Cadmus Project. I don't really see any element of this book that is made better because Maxwell Lord and Mockery are in new positions in this new universe than they were originally. I don't see how this book is made better in any way because of these characters doing different things. Likewise, the character of OMAC himself is changed quite a bit. In the original OMAC series by Jack Kirby, OMAC was more or less a Captain America of the future. At least that's how Jack Kirby envisioned the character. Whether or not that comes across the page is neither here nor there. The point is, the character of OMAC was a sentient being who could speak to people. He cared about people. He was compassionate, yet he was also a fighter. And that was the character that he was. Here, OMAC is basically Blue Hulk. And I know this is a reboot, so there is no reason to keep the original OMAC intact. There is no reason to do the same character at all. This is the perfect point where you can do an entirely new character, and new audiences are not going to care if this is incompatible with the old OMAC. Having said that, I don't entirely understand why DC Comics thought that they needed to do the Adventures of Blue Hulk. Now this is a little bit of a spoiler for the very end of the book, but at the end of the book we finally get to see that OMAC is using polysyllabic words. He's actually thinking, and he realizes that he is Kevin Coe's mind inside OMAC's body. And I'm assuming if this series had gone beyond issue 8, we would have had more of a sentient OMAC as a main character, more along the lines of the character that Jack Kirby brought us back in the 1970s. However, since the series was cancelled with issue 8, I'm assuming because of low sales, that is a moot point and there's no point in us wondering about what ifs. One minor thing I didn't really like about this book is that it crosses over with Frankenstein Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the middle of the book. We see Frankenstein come in, he tries to fight OMAC, the issue ends with them still fighting, and then it says go check out that issue of Frankenstein Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. to see this fight continue. And then this book skips over that issue with no sign of Frankenstein to be seen, with OMAC going back to his own solo adventures. Now, as it turns out, you don't really need the Frankenstein issue to understand what's going on in this book. It's still more or less a coherent story where OMAC is going around trying to break loose of the connection to Brother Eye, trying to get away from Maxwell Lord and the Cadmus Project. You don't really need the other issue of Frankenstein. But at the same time, I am taken out of this book whenever the book is telling me, hey, go read that issue of Frankenstein to see the rest of this story, and then we don't get that issue in this book. You have to go and read Frankenstein Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Volume 1 to even see the rest of that story, and I'm wondering if it's really the rest of the story or if it's just another story where OMAC happens to guest star in the Frankenstein comic, much how Frankenstein is guest starring in this comic book. Overall, do I recommend this book? Absolutely. This was a really fun comic book. If you love Jack Kirby-esque adventures, I highly recommend this book. Sadly, there are no more adventures of OMAC from the New 52, but if anything, I would say that's even more of a reason to pick this up. If you're kind of tentative about what you should and should not pick up, you're not really wanting to commit to a full-on series, this would be the perfect book for you to get. It's completely self-contained within 8 issues, other than OMAC appearing in one issue of Frankenstein Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And that's all I have to say here, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. I will be back tomorrow with some other kind of video. So, until then, I will see you guys later. Have a great day.